Okay. Okay. Gute Woche. Freiliche Woche. Um, Last Motzei Shabbos, we were discussing the difference between the Mittler Rebbe and the Aharon of Strasheler. And we were learning about how he was gifted with a unique um, understanding of godliness and understanding of Chassidus, and he was considered by many to be one of the top Chassidim, top students of the Alter Rebbe. And he did have a tendency to be dismissive of those whose level of serving Hashem didn't measure up to what he considered to be um, what they needed to be. He was dismissive, and he was critical of people who were not the way that he thought they should be, and it really had a negative effect on many of the Chassidim because they looked at him as a mentor, and he was dismissive of them. Not everyone was able to take it and to learn from it and to upgrade their behavior. Some people were knocked down. So the we were discussing last week how the tendency of being dismissive is associated with the sphere of bina. Bina is about understanding and putting parameters and everything. The way the human mind understands things is by putting parameters and defining things. And if that's the impetus of one's service of Hashem, so then that leads towards, that can cause a sense of judgment of others. You're looking at others and you're measuring them. Where are they? Where aren't they? And so he did serve Hashem with incredible passion and open heart. But on one occasion, he came to the Alter Rebbe and he told the Alter Rebbe, as mentioned last week, um, that he's losing his animation in the service of Hashem. He doesn't feel chayas, doesn't feel alive in the service of Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe leaned his holy head on his arms, and he entered into a state of rapture, of dveikus. And after a few moments, the Alter Rebbe lifted his head, and the Alter Rebbe said, Poyal Adam Yeshalim. What man does, he is repaid in kind. God takes care of a person in a way that's measure for measure. When you push away a Jew, even if your intent is for the sake of God, for his own benefit, then God responds also in the same manner. And the gates of heaven are closed before that person. And when you bring a Jew close to you, then God also brings you close, and the doors, the chambers of Torah and service of God open before you. Rabbi Aharon was someone who knew what it meant to serve God with vitality and excitement. He knew what this was about. And the previous Rebbe said that there are some things which are only good for yourself, but they're not good for others. And one of them is bittul, abnegation. It's good to have a sense of self-abnegation, but putting another person down, you have to think before that. The true path, said the previous Rebbe, based on the story, is to bring another Jew close to God with love and friendship, because the truth is that anything that anyone does in the service of God is looked at with the lens, the luminous lens of Chassidus, can see any good thing a person does, how important it is, and how special it is. And so the previous Rebbe is emphasizing how when you look with glasses of Chassidus, you see the good in another person, even though their good leaves much to be desired, but you're able to see their goodness. As Tzemach Tzedek said in the verse, God did not see iniquity in Jacob. Yaakov said that Tzemach Tzedek, because of God's love from his very core to every Jew, therefore God doesn't see, even though there is iniquity, even though there are problems, but God doesn't see it. God looks, as just like in ourselves, our self-love prevents us from seeing our own faults. So because a Jew is bound with God's essence, So God, so to speak, also is able to overlook a Jew's faults because of God's great love for another Jew. In a similar way, um, the we're commanded by Hashem to have the same level of Ahavas Yisrael, that the true sign of Ahavas Yisrael is that you're able to overlook another person's faults. So, although I mentioned that the Rabbi and Strasheler, his sphera was Bina, that's the way he served Hashem, and the Mittel Rebbe also, his sphere was Bina as well, but the Mittel Rebbe's Bina was different than Rabbi and Strasheler's. The Mittel Rebbe's Bina was illuminated with the sphere of Chachma because of his tight bond with his father, and therefore he didn't have the same reaction to others as Rabbi and Strasheler. So it's a very, very powerful message from the story that although there might be a need to give someone a critique, etc., but it does take away from yourself. It does make you lose something of yourself. There is a gate that's being closed. As the Alter Rebbe said, even if it's done for the sake of God, for the benefit of the other person, the way you treat another person, that's the way God treats you. And so therefore there is a door that's being closed. So I wanted to discuss a little bit more about the Mittler Rebbe and the Baron Strasheler to have more of a clear picture of where the Mittler Rebbe came from and the Baron Strasheler and how things evolved. The Alter Rebbe, although he was blessed with many daughters, he didn't have any sons. And so in the lifetime of his teacher and Rebbe, the Mzitcha Magid, he asked him many times for blessing for children. And Mzitcha Magid, he didn't bless him. He didn't bless him with a child, with a son. Instead, Mzitcha Magid would say, the Talmud says, sometimes Mzitcha Magid would come for the Alter Rebbe and say to him that the Talmud says that having a daughter first is a blessing to have a son eventually. Mzitcha Magid told the Alter Rebbe, your daughter Freda, is her level of learning Chassidus is like a son. But right before Mzitcha Magid passed away, he told the Alter Rebbe, don't ask me where I heard this from, and don't ask me how I know this. And he started to tell the Alter Rebbe, how can someone, the simple translation of the verse of Psalms is, I think it's from Psalm 119, I think, how can a young man purify his path? So the Mzitcha Magid told the Alter Rebbe, this verse could also be read to mean, how does one merit to have a child as orchai, by inviting guests? So the Alter Rebbe and his Rebbesim, of course, elated because the Mzitcha Magid was telling the Alter Rebbe that they will have a child. And this was similar to the birth of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was also born, as a famous story, that when God wanted to send the world in the soul of the Baal Shem Tov, so the God first tested the parents of the Baal Shem Tov to see how they would treat a guest who acted very insolently and brazenly and all kinds of issues, which was really Elijah the prophet, who was disguised as this insolent guest. And when they passed this test with flying colors, Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Navi, told them that they will merit to have a son, Baal Shem Tov, who will illuminate the entire world forever until the coming Mashiach and beyond. So when the Alter Rebbe heard from his teacher that the way to have a child, the way to marry to have a child is by having guests, he knew that this was something that had happened to the Baal Shem Tov's parents, and therefore he was very excited. So before the Mzitcha Magid passed away, Mzitcha Magid said that if someone in the last 3 days of their life, someone who's a true servant of Hashem, is able to see things of the future, see things with divine inspiration. In the Haftorah that was being read that week, the verse the Haftorah began with the words, Hazon Ovadia, which literally means Ovadia had a vision. But the Mzitcha Magid explained that this verse also means that Oyved Yudke, someone who serves God, is given vision. He told the Alter Rebbe that this is what you should do when you'll have a bris. This is what you should do in the night before a bris. So it's clear that the Mzitcha Magid was telling him not as only as a blessing, but as a promise he will have a child. And then the Mezritcher Maggid asked the Alter Rebbe, why don't you ask me what you should do on the Friday night before Bris, which is called Seder Shalom Ben Zachar? So Alter Rebbe responded, because I feel that the words that the Mezritcher Maggid are telling me are are being given from on high. They are talad and nativ matika kadisha. It's like dew that's coming from Atik. In other words, it's a Kabbalistic term which means that just like dew comes from heaven without a person preparing for dew, it's just a gift from on high, and dew is never withheld from heaven. God always gives dew, unlike rain, which is based upon the merits of the world. But dew is always given. So dew is something which comes from heaven to the Jewish people, whether or not they're ready for it. So too, the Alter Rebbe said, I feel that the teachings that you're giving me are just being given from on high, and therefore I'm not meant to arouse them and ask about them. And the Alter Rebbe actually quoted a verse in this week's Torah portion, when Jewish people are standing by the Reed Sea. God told Moshe Rabbeinu, "Amatitzakalai, why are you calling out to me?" In other words, this is something which is going to be given from on high. It's not about asking, requesting, and crying. So the Ramei Ravtzin, Olav Shalom, who a lot of what I'm going to share tonight comes from the excellent work of his son, of Shalom Bered Avtzin, in his book on the Mittler Rebbe. He said that the words of the Mezritcher Maggid, or the words of the Alter Rebbe, that the Mezritcher Maggid validated, that this instruction of the that the Mezritcher Maggid was telling the Alter Rebbe about what he should do on the Friday night before Bris, that this instruction is something which he's just been given on high, and it's from an attic, it's from this very lofty place. Meir Avson said that from here you could see the great caliber of the soul of Mittler Rebbe, that this is not something that could be asked for, that there was some kind of heavenly accusation preventing this soul being given to the world. But then there's a time when just from on high it's being given without any preparation in the world. The world's unable to receive it, the world's not a vessel for it, but just God is deciding to send to the world whether we're deserving or not. So the Mittler Rebbe, his name is the same as Moshe Maggid, as Maggid told the Alter before he passed away, when you have a child, you should name him after me. I'm mentioning this story because you could see already before the birth of the Mittler Rebbe, the clear bond that his birth has with the Alter Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe's teacher. And this is part of the Shalshal Sayachas, how this is part of the continuum of the tzaddikim of each generation. This was a unique blessing that Mezritcher Maggid gave the Alter Rebbe, that he will have a son and name after his teacher, the Mezritcher Maggid. Before the Mittler Rebbe assumed leadership of the Jewish people, right in the time of the Alter Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe already designated him to succeed him. 6 weeks before the Alter Rebbe passed away, the Alter Rebbe did not want to be under the rulership of Napoleon even for a moment, as we discussed another time. The Alter Rebbe set out, leaving his hometown with a caravan of many wagons, and when it came right before Rosh Hashanah, right before 6 weeks before the Alter Rebbe passed away, the Alter Rebbe said that he's upset because it looks like that Napoleon will enter Moscow, will enter Russia, and will be successful. But on Rosh Hashanah, the Alter Rebbe was very happy. The Alter Rebbe says that Napoleon will not get past Moscow. Napoleon will be defeated, and he won't get past Moscow. The Alter Rebbe was elated. And actually, Napoleon entered Moscow, and when he did, and he burned down the Russian Senate, the Mittler Rebbe came to the Alter Rebbe, who was then wearing his Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, and he said to the Alter Rebbe, "Where is your promise, Father?" And the Alter Rebbe said, "Chai Hashem, Chai Nafshi, as God lives, as my soul lives, I swear to you, Napoleon will not get past Moscow." And indeed, Napoleon's forces had a disgraceful defeat in Moscow, and they had to eventually retreat. So although they entered Russia on the 8th day of Tishrei, but they had to retreat, and he did lose that battle. So after the war, Napoleon was over, there was a huge issue that thousands of Jews and thousands of non-Jews had, that where will we go now? There was a lot of upheaval because of the war. People weren't living in their homes anymore. People had to run away. Where will they go? So the Alter Rebbe immediately set um, a plan to help the Jews who had lost their livelihood, who had lost their homes. And the question was, where should a center of operations be to help these Jews? So the city of Piana, where he was near, it wasn't a very Jewish neighborhood, and it was, in order to help everyone, it's more of a Jewish center where there's kosher food would be much better suitable for this endeavor. So the question was, did Alter Rebbe go to Kremenchuk? Where? So he sent his son, the Mittler Rebbe, to check out a Shem Kremenchuk as a possible option for them to move there and to set up emergency housing for the Alter Rebbe and his family and his household. So that's because the Mittler Rebbe was away. Therefore, he wasn't present when his father, the Alter Rebbe, passed away. When the Mittler Rebbe was told, a special messenger came to tell the Mittler Rebbe about his father's passing, he fainted. And when he was revived, he fainted again. And one chassid told the Mittler Rebbe, I have writings of your father, chassidus of your father. And he gave them to him. So the Mittler Rebbe awoke from his faint and he said, oh, there's a reason to live. The Mittler Rebbe was very upset. He said, how did you let him go? How did you let him go? The Mittler Rebbe writes in a letter how for 3 days he was not able to come to himself. He was unable to respond to anyone who came to offer him consolation. He was completely unable to correspond to people because he was so distraught by his father's passing. So and there was a discussion about who indeed which should be the successor of the Alter Rebbe. But the truth is that the Alter Rebbe already had foreseen that this would be a question. And the Alter Rebbe already before his passing, years before his passing, had already designated the Mittler Rebbe to be his successor. The Alter Rebbe would say Hasidic discourses at the weddings of his grandchildren. But at the wedding between the Mittler Rebbe's daughter, Rabbi Tzensara, and the grandson of Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev, Reb Eliezer, this wedding was a very unique wedding. It's known till today, and even in the Chassidic lexicon, a zhlab ner chasna means a huge wedding, because at this wedding, all the who's who of all the Jewish people, of the Chassidim especially, were there. A marriage between the eldest and the most prestigious student of the Bzditcha Magid, the Rabbi Berditchev, and between the Alter Rebbe. This was a huge event. And at this wedding, the Alter Rebbe asked the Mittler Rebbe to say Chassidus. But the Mittler Rebbe didn't want to say Chassidus because he knew that the Rabbi Berditchev had a different path, and then he knew also there was a great antagonism that other Hasidic Rebbes had to the Alter Rebbe, because Alter Rebbe's path was very different to theirs. He explained Chassidus in a very methodical and logical way, and their way of serving Hashem was more in an emotional way, more with more excitement, enthusiasm, and not with an internal enthusiasm, an internal fire that Chabad Chassidus espouses. So the Mittler Rebbe was going to refuse, but Rabbi Berditchev asked the Mittler Rebbe, I want you to hear your Chassidus, and I promise I won't interrupt. But when the Mittler Rebbe started to say Chassidus, Rabbi Yitzchak was so excited that he had to bite his fingers in order to hold himself back from reacting. And when the Mittler Rebbe concluded, Rabbi Yitzchak used to wear his tzitzis, his talis cotton, over his shirt. And he took his tzitzis and he put his tzitzis over the Mittler Rebbe's head. And he said, the angels should not be jealous of you. And he was so excited to hear this revelation of Galileans, the Mittler Rebbe's Chassidus, Mittler Rebbe sharing these deep teachings. He was so excited. He said, the angels should not be jealous of you. And the Alter Rebbe, at this wedding, he had specifically instructed the Mittler Rebbe, before the Mittler Rebbe used to say Chassidus of the Alter Rebbe, his father's teachings, and he would explain them. But at this wedding, the Alter Rebbe said he should say his own Chassidus. And not only was it but this happened at this wedding. But the Alter Rebbe wanted to make sure the Mittler Rebbe would say Chassidus continuously. And so for many Shabbosim, the Mittler Rebbe and the Alter would alternate, where one would say Chassidus one week, one would say Chassidus another week during the leadership of the time of the Alter Rebbe. One of the Chassidim, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Isaac Halmer, told the Alter Rebbe, I learned Chassidus from you. You are a Rebbe, but I really have a geschmack. I really enjoy the Chassidus of your son, the Mittler Rebbe, the way he explains it. The Alter Rebbe really appreciated that. The Mittler Rebbe, from the age of 17, was entrusted by the Alter Rebbe to guide the Chassidim. And when he turned 35 years old, all the letters that came to Alter Rebbe were answered by the Mittler Rebbe. So at the wedding, the Alter Rebbe told Rabbi Pinchas Reizes that the Mittler Rebbe should be the Rebbe, and that he, after his passing, and that he alone is the one that people can send a request for blessing from a pidyon nefesh. He is alone is fitting to say Chassidus. That's the Alter Rebbe instructed at this wedding. And only he can educate the Chassidim. So when the Alter Rebbe did pass away, the Mittler Rebbe, as I mentioned, was very distraught. But 3 days later, when the Mittler Rebbe calmed down a little bit from this shock, the Mittler Rebbe said, "My father is saying Chassidus in Gan Eden. He's saying Chassidus in heaven, and we need to get the mail from heaven. We need to get the Chassidus. These are Chassidim in heaven in Gan Eden, and they're listening to my father say Chassidus. We have to get a postman to bring the Chassidus from heaven here." When the Chassidim heard this, they were elated because that meant that Mittler Rebbe was going to be the postman. He was going to share the Chassidus. And so many Chassidim, they knew, knowing the humble nature of the Mittler Rebbe, similar to our Rebbe, who didn't want to accept leadership of Chassidim for an entire year after the previous of his passing until a year later on Yud Shvat, many Chassidim wrote the Mittler Rebbe Iksavis Kashas. They wrote him a letter asking him, please accept the leadership of the Chassidim. And but here, this unusual thing happened. There was an opposition from within. Many of the Chassidim thought that the Mittler Rebbe wasn't meant to be the successor of the Alter Rebbe. They thought that just like the Baal Shem Tov had a son, Reb Tzvi, although he was a tzaddik, he was not meant to be the leader of the Chassidim. And just like the Mezitcha Maggid had a son who was angelic, they called him Avram the angel, but he was not meant to be the successor of the Mezitcha Maggid. So too the Chassidim thought the Mittler Rebbe's path was very different to the Alter Rebbe. They thought that the Alter Rebbe, his discourse was very short. Mittler Rebbe's discourses were longer and longer, and they thought that this was a different path than the Alter Rebbe, and he's not supposed to be succeeding. They also knew that the Mittler Rebbe was completely divested of the physical, and therefore they thought that he is. I think the language that's used, the Mittler Rebbe didn't recognize a coin. He was so divested in the physical, he never looked at money. Let me just get a plug for a second and plug the computer in before it dies. 1 second.
We stay tuned for the computer.
All right, guys, 1 second. I'll plug this in. Okay. Oops. Okay. Oops. All right. I think we are charging. All right. You feeling charged? Let's go. Okay. So the Mittler Rebbe, he had opposition from within. There were many Majority of Hasidim knew that Mittler Rebbe was the successor of the Alter Rebbe, but some thought that his colleague, the one I mentioned before, Baron Strasheler, that he was supposed to lead the Hasidim. They knew that the Alter Rebbe had appointed him um, to to be- to educate Chassidim as well, but they knew that the Alter Rebbe would say discourses to a very few, he said many discourses in public, but there are many discourses that only some people heard. They thought that Rabbi Aharon, he was gifted to be allowed in to hear the Alter Rebbe's private discourses, but they didn't know that the Alter Rebbe would say discourses only for a son, the Mittler Rebbe daily. Um, so there were many Chassidim who were taken by Aaron Strasheler, and they thought that he was supposed to be the Rebbe. One of them was the famous Chassid Moshe Levin. Moshe Levin was a man with extraordinary intellectual capabilities. In Hayom Yom, it says that for 3 years he prepared to visit the Alter Rebbe, and for 7 years after he visited the Alter Rebbe, he worked to internalize the words of the Alter Rebbe. And so in Hayom Yom, the Alter Rebbe writes, the Alter Rebbe said that he has a broad mind. He attained a broad understanding of Chassidus through his great efforts for 10 years, learning and understanding. So Rabbi Moshe Levin, he was one of those who was gravitated towards Maran Strasheler. But at one point, he realized that Maran Strasheler was not meant to be the Chabad Rebbe. Maran Strasheler, after teaching Chassidus, sometimes he would jump on the table and he would say, Ein Olamavad is nothing besides Hashem. So Rabbi Moshe Levin, he somehow realized, this is not the path of Chabad Chassidus. This overt jumping on the table excitement is not the path of Chabad Chassidus. And therefore he told Baron Strasheler, come back, come down. He realized it wasn't the same thing. There was one chassid of the Mittler Rebbe, his name was Elyo Yosef Rivlin. Rabbi Yosef Rivlin, he at first wanted to follow the path of Baron Strasheler, and on one occasion he was supposed to go to a family wedding. At this wedding, he knew that the Mittler was going to come there, and he was afraid that when the Mittler would say Chassidus, he might get very inspired and might want to join the Mittler Rebbe. So he asked his Rebbe, Baron Strasheler, what should I do? Baron said, you can go there, but don't listen to him. If you listen to him, he's gonna sweep you away. He's going to enchant you. You shouldn't listen to him. So he comes to the wedding, and as soon as the Mittler walks in, he walked out in order they shouldn't be, he shouldn't get caught up. But what ended up happening was there was such a throng of people. When the Mittler entered, there's no way to leave. He couldn't move. And he just seeing the Chassidut Rebbe and the way they listened to him with such abnegation and devotion, that itself had an effect on him. How much more so when he started hearing the Mittler Rebbe's Chassidus, that really touched him. And Pinchas Reizes and the Alter Rebbe's brother and the Maharil, Yudah Leib, they send out letters to Rabbi Strasheler, to all the Chassidim, to all those who had left the Mittler Rebbe, and they said to them, listen, guys, you have to realize the Alter Rebbe himself appointed the Mittler Rebbe to succeed him. And it's not about you to decide how a Rebbe is supposed to work, or a Rebbe is not supposed to work. You have to realize there's limitation you have. And so this had a major effect on many of the Chassidim to realize that this was a mistake. And so when Chassidim realized their mistake, they came back to the Mittler Rebbe, and many of them Mittler Rebbe accepted, and some of them they say Mittler Rebbe could smell in someone's beard if he was indeed returning to become connected to him, or he was still ambivalent. And so there were some Chassidim that the Mittler Rebbe couldn't accept. They weren't there. The bottom line is that as we're approaching the day of Yud Shvat, and as I mentioned last week, the path of the previous Rebbe that he taught, the path of Chassidim, the path of Chabad Chassidim, is bring people close with Ahavas Yisrael, with love. And this is the path, the golden path towards the coming Mashiach. And so, as we're approaching the day of Yud Shvat, think about the words of the Alter Rebbe. The way that we act, that's how God responds to us. The way to connect to the previous Rebbe, the way to connect to our Rebbe, is poyal adam, is to act in a way of closeness, and this is how it causes in turn on heaven that God brings us close to Him and gives us vitality and excitement and connection in our service of Hashem, and brings us to where we need to be, and brings us towards the time when Hashem will show the whole world His goodness and kindness with coming Mashiach Tzidkeinu. Should see it happen immediately because of Mamash. Any questions, comments, or criticism today?
The computer got recharged when you plugged it in. We got
Huh?
recharged when the computer got recharged when you plug it in. You said you have to recharge the computer. You have to plug it in. When we go to the OHEL, when we go to the OHEL, we get recharged.
Okay. If you can't go to the oil,
You
you should write to the oil.
should verbring. You should write to OHEL and have the verbringen, attend the verbringen, and the verbringen should be, it's a spiritual group therapy, and it's when we all go with chitas to strengthen ourselves. We do chitas and study Rambam or at least every mitzvahs every day, and to